Ladies and gentlemen, this is hard to say because I got some people looking at me right now that might give me a hard time with this, but I promised everybody that I would produce the person that knows more about Lafayette than any human being in the world. And tonight we're doing that. Before we start, I definitely want to thank Joe and Eileen Volpe. Our presenter tonight is at their home doing it from their house. They helped me set it up. They helped me set up all the images that we're going to see of tonight's program. So I want to thank the Volpes very much. Thank you, Joe and Eileen. Joe and Eileen will be heading our day one of Lafayette, or excuse me, AFL 250, June 13th in South Carolina, as we 2027, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of Lafayette first stepping on American soil. We're very excited about that in 2027. Without any further ado, I'd like to very much introduce a friend of mine, a gentleman that was at one time the president of our organization, and now he is a scholar, a professor, and tonight's presenter. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Robert Crout.
Thank you, Chuck. One of the questions that we often ask is, of course, there's so many new people in the American Friends of Lafayette over the 40 years that I've been associated with it. And I don't get to every meeting now, so there are a lot of people who don't know who the heck I am. So I thought, first of all, I would cover the question of how does one develop some kind of expertise on Lafayette. So I thought I'd give a little introduction here. And so let's start with the first picture here.
All right, here we go. Hold on one second. There we go.
Okay, which goes back to me about age 10 when a favorite aunt made me a costume for the holidays. I'm not quite sure whether it was a George Washington outfit or a Lafayette outfit, but I've had an interest in the Revolutionary era since then, so I guess that puts it at about 70 years worth of interest. Of course, I was a history major in undergrad school, but when I headed off to grad school, I was the research assistant for a professor who was working on a book on Rochambeau's army in America. And so he and I developed a bibliography there together for his book, and that really got me into the Revolutionary era. And the result was that I was able to get a Fulbright Hays to study in France, in Paris, on my dissertation in 1973-74. And I looked a little bit different in those days. Of course, at that point, haircuts were so expensive in Paris. I think that had a lot to do with my decision not to get my hair cut for about 6 months or so there. But it was the research in that year that really launched me into an expertise on Lafayette, which, first of all, in 1975, allowed me to be a finalist for a position with the Franklin Papers at Yale. I didn't get that position. Of course, that was kind of devastating for a young person, but I didn't know that when there was a vacancy at the Lafayette Project at Cornell, that the editor of the Franklin Papers would recommend me for that opening. So here I am, newly arrived at the frozen campus of Cornell. I think I must have been out for maybe 2 or 3 minutes to get that photograph, which is pretty much the scene from the Lafayette Papers office at Cornell. And I was there from 1978 to 1981. From there, I went to the Jefferson Papers at Princeton. We don't have a copy of that. This is a copy, go back one. That is the Olin Library where the Lafayette Papers project was centered at Cornell. Next, after working at the Jefferson Papers for a couple of years, there was an opening at the Madison Papers project at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which is where I worked for 3 years for the period on Madison as Secretary of State. And it was there that I found out that the American Friends of Lafayette was still an existing organization. So this photograph was hosting their meeting in Charlottesville about 1984. As you can see, I'm getting a little bit older, a little more knowledgeable. I guess the advantage of working with these projects is I was able to piggyback all of the experience that the Jefferson Papers had on Lafayette, add to that all of the documents the Madison Papers had collected on Lafayette from some private collectors and things. So my knowledge of Lafayette kept expanding during that period, and I got to meet the wonderful world of the American Friends of Lafayette. Now, I really love teaching, and I got back into teaching. I had this visit to Lafayette College and their collections there. So here you see me at their building. I got an NEH to go back to Cornell and collect some of the materials that the project had there. And then that led me to my next adventure, which was going back to France. And so just about every summer from 1990 to 2016, I would spend the summer in France working on Mr. Lafayette. So here we have the first of the many repositories that have Lafayette letters. This is the Paris Municipal History Library that you're seeing here. Next is the French National Archives. I had worked here as a graduate student, but over the next few years, as now a full academic, I got much better access than I did as a graduate student. And so here we have the entrance to that. Next, through the facilities of one of the archivists there, Madame Toutier Bonazzi. She was the authority on Lafayette in France. Many of you will recall she did the companion French volume to documents on Lafayette in the French National Archives. When she was a young woman, she was the one who really put together that catalog and exhibit in 1957 that those of you who are going to Paris for the coming exhibit, you will really see the follow-up on the wonderful collection that she put together there in 1957. Of course, over those years, she knew just about anyone who had family collections of Lafayette, and she was kind enough, generous enough to put me in contact with them so I could have use of those family papers. Next. This is the next connection, and that is when we did the Lafayette project at Cornell was the first time that the Chambrun Foundation in Paris had allowed access to Americans, and they made typescripts available to us of Lafayette's letters to Adrienne. We never got to see the original letters or photographs, merely the transcripts that their secretaries had typed up for us. But in 1992, when Rene de Chambrun's wife, José, died, I happened to be in Paris at that time. I attended her funeral. He saw my name in the book of condolences, and so he invited me to come over to his office. This was his international law office on the Champs-Élysées. Next. Now this is Rene de Chambrun, the founder, along with his wife, of the Chambrun Foundation. He allowed me to visit the house, and he was surprised that an American would know these particularly French aspects of Lafayette's life. At that point, he told his secretary, "Il sait tout." And the result was that he said, from now on, anytime you're in Paris on Friday, my secretary will drive you over to Lagrange and you can use the papers there for the day. I decided, of course, as a poor young professor, that I couldn't afford to spend that much time in Paris. So eventually, a contract was negotiated with the Library of Congress for the microfilming of those papers. And so they're now in several repositories around the United States. I think we have another picture of Chambrun, yes, in his private office, and even one more, I think. Yes, there he is. He attended an LA Dodgers game one year, and that was his pride, was to have the baseball cap. And there he has a baseball in his hand. As a young man, he had studied law in Manhattan, and I'm sure he got an interest in the Dodgers when he was in the New York area before they moved to the West Coast. So there's our baseball player right there. Next. And as you can see, things really opened up. He started allowing more people to have access to the records of Lafayette in his last years, and really set a pattern there for the Chambrun Foundation to welcome scholars. Next. This was a research fellowship with a very important foundation in America that does a lot of things for teachers at the university and high school level of history. This is the office of the Gilda Lehrman Foundation in New York City. And I was there in 1995 to assist them in identifying and dating the Lafayette letters in their collection. This is Paul Romaine, who was one of the original collectors for that great institution. I recommend it to anybody who's a school teacher of history. Next. And of course, this is the mighty reading room at the New York Public Library. As a result of my fellowship, it allowed me to go over there, and at the very end of that reading room is the manuscript room, which, if you know the manuscripts you want to see, they can bring them out for you in the little manuscript reading room. Next. Here I am at the manuscript library of the Library of Congress, where I've spent many different trips. When the microfilm first came out for the Lagrange Lafayette papers, I would go to the bank across the street, get about $100 worth of quarters, go into that building and start copying as many of the pictures as I thought would be useful for my work on Mr. Lafayette. So there are many treasures in the manuscript division of the Library of Congress. Next. And of course, Mount Vernon and that wonderful Smith Library of the a presidential library of Washington, which is very recent, but really a gold mine of anything related to George Washington. And they do have a full staff there to assist you with any research you need. Next. And another great opportunity was a fellowship at Harvard. Here we are at Harvard Yard. The Houghton Library is the rare manuscript collection for Harvard. Next. It's this little pillbox building next to the Widener Library, which is the general library for the campus. And there I am, hard at work in there. And there I was primarily working on the papers of an American named Jared Sparks, who was the first biographer of Washington. He also visited Lafayette in 1828, has had a number of interviews with him that are recorded there, Lafayette's memories of all of these great events. Sparks also was able to have a secretary to transcribe a lot of documents from Lagrange, which are available to American scholars through Sparks's copies. Next. This, of course, is the relatively new French National Library in Paris. This is one of the towers. Here I am. By the way, unfortunately, the escalator there almost never works, so you end up walking up the escalator. But again, it is a collection of very rare pamphlets, a lot of Lafayette speeches. There are printed copies of them there. There are microfilms of a lot of newspapers and magazines that would carry very obscure material on Lafayette's movements. Next. And here I am, and I guess this was a 2016 visit, finally across the river there, not too far from Notre Dame on the Ile de la Cité, is the Polish Library, which has a lot of manuscripts. Lafayette in his later years was very much involved with the Poles who were in a fight to the death against the Russians who were crushing their revolution. Lafayette was very much involved in supporting the Poles there, and I'm right there at the entrance to that. Okay. And here I am with one of your members who is watching tonight, Carolyn LaRousse. There we are gathered for the 4th of July event at Lafayette's grave at Picpus. As you can see tonight, and from that photograph, I've traveled a lot of roads with Lafayette. I feel like, I've got a touch of his gout. I have a little lameness. It seems all the Lafayette things. Now, this is the Sterling Library at Yale, which is where the Franklin papers are housed. Next. In the background there, you will see the Beinecke Library, which is their rare book library. They have a major collection of Lafayette manuscript from one of the founders of the American Friends of Lafayette, Stuart Jackson. I went there in 2004 when they were uncatalogued. They have now been cataloged, so they're very easy to get access to now. Next is the Huntington Library and Museum in near Los Angeles, California. Of course, from the Huntington Railroad fortune, they had a large endowment there and were able to acquire a lot of manuscripts. There's some very interesting materials there. And here is a group of American Friends of Lafayette meeting at Yorktown in the late 80s. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody in that group other than myself is still around. So that's kind of the introduction. I guess we could say since 1969, I've been seriously working on the French and the American Revolution. And of course, since 78, concentrating my work on Lafayette. Tonight, I'm going to talk about Lafayette's 1784 tour of America, which was his first opportunity to come back after the Yorktown campaign. And he had thought that he would be able to come over, but since it appeared that there was going to be no more active combat, he stayed in France a little while longer. But many of his friends in America invited him to come over and celebrate the victory after the negotiation of the peace, which also meant that Lafayette didn't have to worry about being captured on the open Atlantic by British cruisers, anything like that. So it was a lot safer for him to wait until the treaty was finalized. And I'm not going to give you a tour of all the places that he visited in 1784. I have some published material I'll show you at the end of the presentation tonight if you want more details. I know some of you are disappointed not seeing a lot of pictures of the places that he visited and where he was celebrated. But as I was preparing this, I went down and tried to look up a number of these places. We don't really have a contemporary image of the American Philosophical Society where Lafayette spoke in Philadelphia. They didn't move into that building until after Lafayette's tour, the building over there next to Independence Hall. There's not really any early 1780 image of Mount Vernon. Most of you are familiar with that painting of Lafayette and Washington talking on the portico there that has been promoted in a lot of things. Unfortunately, that painting wasn't done until 1859. And if you look fairly closely at it, you'll notice that the chairs that people are sitting in on the porch were not created until the 1830s and 40s. So it does have a lot of inaccuracies. It's more of, I guess, an image of what somebody in 1859 would have wanted for Lafayette. Yes, that's it. As you'll notice, those are very nice 1820s and 1830s chairs there. You'll notice the servant playing with one of the Custis family kids there. So you have the feeling that he was a very benevolent slave owner. I'm not sure that Lafayette would have appreciated that image, but there are a lot of historical inaccuracies of that. So I didn't want to go there. Let's see, a number of the other places that Lafayette visited no longer exist. The Capitol in Richmond, the legislature was meeting somewhere else. That wasn't begun until after Lafayette's tour. So, in other words, I decided rather than do a lot of non-historical images of the tour, I'd get down to the core of the significance of the tour. The question is, why was the tour set up, and what was Lafayette looking for in the tour? And of course, we can all understand that he wanted to come back and he wanted to meet his old brother soldiers. The senior officers were starting to get up in years. He definitely wanted to see Washington. And there is in the Lafayette Papers, Volume 5, that tear-jerking letter that Washington writes Lafayette, where he says, my family does not have long-lived men, and I fear that when you come back next, I will be in the tomb of my fathers, which unfortunately turned out to be true. So Lafayette definitely wanted to get back and see Washington. He didn't realize that he would lose a number of these other people, like Nathaniel Greene and some of his close friends. So he really did want to get back. And there is one document that I think reflects this that I want to share with you. And that is when Lafayette was in Boston in October of 1784, a lot of the officers who had served from Massachusetts in the Continental Army went over to his lodging there, and he was addressed by them by Henry Knox, again, somebody that he was very close to. And the reply that he gave, of which the original manuscript exists in the Maine Historical Society, I'll give that to you. From the instant of our parting, gentlemen, have I been eagerly looking forward to this period. How far my pleasure is completed by your so kind welcome, I leave, my beloved friends, to your own hearts to determine. While your affection and confidence ever made me happy, let me gratefully acknowledge that for the marks of our general's approval, I felt myself wholly obliged to the gallant troops I commanded. Could any conduct of mine in some degree justify your partiality, it will be the pride of my heart to think our American camp was my school, every one of you, my brothers, and that I was adopted as a disciple and son by our immortal commander-in-chief. In the interposition of my sovereign and country, sovereign being the King of France, I enjoyed more than I could express every French citizen felt with a patriotic king in this happy alliance. And from those troops who shared in our dangers, you meet with a most peculiar regard and attachment. During my absence, gentlemen, my heart has been constantly with you. As an army, we are separated, but forever, I hope, shall unite in a brotherly affection. And now that a glorious peace has terminated your labors, I rejoice to find your attachment to those principles for which you have conquered, ranks you among the most virtuous citizens of the Commonwealth. Now, one of the other themes, other than this kind of fraternal friendship, is this closing phrase here. I rejoice to find your attachment to those principles for which you have conquered. It is that idea of the principles of the American Revolution. You see, once Lafayette gets back to France and is involved with American and French diplomats, he notices a certain level of cynicism, which may be the currency of diplomats, but also questions about, well, what the future of this American confederation would be. How long could it last? Could it last 5 years, 10 years before the different interest of the Americans would move them to break apart? And actually, some of the French diplomats were betting on how long that would be. So Lafayette was concerned that the reasons for what the war was fought, liberty and justice, and a level of equality and the opportunity for people to go as far as they could based on their talents. These things that had operated in the army. And Lafayette was also very much troubled by differences between different states, tariffs and things between states, laws that would not allow goods to cross state boundaries. These very much concerned him. And so he spent much of the tour talking, especially to his friends, about how to bring this confederation into a stronger federal union. And again, I have some suggestions at the end about an essay that I wrote a few years back about Lafayette's role in encouraging people to have a new constitution. These are really the issues that Lafayette came here for. It wasn't just for the parades. It wasn't just for the fireworks, the salutes, and so forth. As much as the crowds came out to meet him, he was really concerned that the mainstream of Americans would foresee the need for a stronger government, and that they would work to see if those boundaries between the states would be an encouragement, not only for greater trade and movement between the states, but in terms of the relationship of France with this new emerging nation. Would they be interested? And in fact, Lafayette talked with a number of his old officers. Why don't you send your sons to France? They can stay with me. They can learn about French culture. They can learn about French business. They can help bind our alliance. And in fact, Lafayette was very interested in bringing his son to America, which he hoped to do under more peaceful conditions until the French Revolution broke out. I guess one of the people who really followed through on this was Nathaniel Greene's son came over and spent a lot of time with Lafayette. So that is really the first tour. Now, we've spent a lot of time this last year dealing with the tour of 1824-25. That was a very critical time for America too. As you know, one of Lafayette's not closest friends, but a friend he called friend in his letters, James Monroe, had issued the Monroe Doctrine, which widely misunderstood these days was initially a call to the authoritarian governments in Europe to not undermine the young republics in Central and South America. And Lafayette was very much in favor of that. French politics had taken a bad turn in the 1820s. Lafayette was out of the Legislative Assembly, the Chamber of Deputies, in 1824, which freed him up to come to America. But it was this opportunity of coming to America and visiting America and observing and participating in American institutions, that Lafayette, with his friends, would publicize in France. This is how a republic functions. This is how a Republican citizens treat those less fortunate. They create institutions to support widows, orphans, the elderly, and at the same time, how a republic can thrive commercially, how it can use technology to improve the lives of ordinary people. So there were a lot of things caught up in Lafayette's tour of 1824-25, other than the huzzas and the fireworks and so forth. So if you'll look at the toasts that Lafayette's involved in, if you look at the addresses that he delivers during that tour, you will get hints about the agenda that Lafayette hoped that the United States would commit to, so far as exporting Republican government, certainly to South America, but hopefully back to Europe, where it had really suffered some tremendous defeats in the early 1820s. Now, you've all seen that wonderful translation of Lafayette's secretary Levasseur's book on Lafayette's tour. One of the things that you may have asked is, why didn't it come out in 1826 or 1827 or 1828? Why is it 1829 before it ever makes an appearance? And that's because there's another agenda in Levasseur's book, which Levasseur went to Lagrange in January of 1829 to begin documenting and putting that book together. Is the book was not simply just a celebration of the tour, but it was a record of how America got to be a republic. It has, as you all know who've seen the book, founding documents that would be made available in it for a French audience. Later, it appears in German and Dutch and so forth. And it is the idea that these founding documents, the text would be available to people who bought the book. And also, they would get a flavor for what life in a republic could be like if they adopted it. So there's a very big agenda in Levasseur's book. Now, as 1829 develops, Lafayette begins to think that everything that he had learned about the tours in America, the fact that newspapers had taken the addresses he gave, the toasts that were given, and spread them throughout the land. No matter where you were, you knew what if you were in South Carolina, you knew what the celebration in Boston was. You knew what was happening along the tour. You knew the appeals for a more perfect union that Lafayette was so committed to, that those legacies could be a part of France. And so in 1824 and 25, the American newspapers are sent back to France to give people a foretaste of what Republican government could be like in this celebration of Lafayette. But not simply that. It was that Lafayette was going to his birth home, Chavignac, in southern France, which, by the way, was a property that his son George Washington was going to take over. But Lafayette transformed this trip into a French tour. And Lafayette decided to go to visit some other in-laws in Grenoble. And Lafayette converts this into a patriotic tour in which he spreads this same religion of Republican government to France. And a number of newspapers decide to publish these toasts, these addresses. Well, I think what's very different about France in 1829 than America in 1824-25 is he's dealing with an authoritarian government, because the newspapers that are publishing these things are suddenly called before the courts in France to explain whether they should still have permission to publish, because they're publishing an insurrectional material. And in fact, the government comes down hard on any French officials that participate in these celebrations with Lafayette. The mayors of some towns are fired. Not only that, the local officials, the prefects that govern each of these subdivisions of France, the département, are given orders to ban posters in these towns, to ban crowds as maybe being insurrectional, causing rioting and so forth. And not only that, they would even in the countryside where they would have bonfires to welcome Lafayette, that there would be orders issued, no bonfires, it might be a fire danger. So in every way, the authoritarian government in France would be using its power to crush the followers of Lafayette as much as possible. So that's kind of the story of this Lafayette tour. In a sense, it did spread interest in Lafayette and the old revolution of France, for maybe the possibility that we don't have to put up with authoritarian government that is stifling our freedom and our liberty. And I think it's very important to realize that it's only the next summer when the French have the revolution of 1830, when again Lafayette is acclaimed and asked, well, what kind of government would you like us to have? Well, unfortunately, Lafayette felt that a Republican government at that point would lead to maybe too radical a transition for France. So he really locked on to Louis Philippe, who had lived a brief time in America, and felt that Lafayette felt, well, he knows what American principles are. And if he's able to maintain a monarchy with Republican institutions, maybe that's the best for the meantime until the French are prepared for a true republic, not realizing that Louis Philippe was going to use his power to again create a very authoritarian government that would eventually lead, after Lafayette's death, to a major revolution in 1848. So that's kind of the role of these tours. They're not just trips. They're not just chances to celebrate Lafayette. Lafayette had a very serious, I've said it before. People always talk about Lafayette being too idealistic. I said, that's because you don't know him. His actions were very pragmatic. He did have ideals, but he knew that people had to be prepared to make change. So that's kind of what I wanted to say tonight. And I look forward to your questions.
Robert, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And literally, I'm so excited. We see a lot of young people on the call today, and I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions. And guys, if you want to ask any question of Lafayette, go ahead, please. Now, there's two ways to do that. You can do that in the chat, or you can do that in...
Chuck, could somebody's already asked about, they thought they would learn more about the 1784 tour. Could I answer that right now?
Where do you see that question in chat?
With these three books? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to show you the three books?
Yeah. Let's show them now.
Okay. Let's see if I can do that. I'm doing this without Bonnie, everybody. I just want to make sure everybody realizes that Bonnie is not in the room.
Okay. I hope I've whetted your appetite to learn more about the 1784 tour. I have a couple of suggestions for you. I said, I hope you this has whetted your appetite to learn more about these tours. I have some suggestions for you. Yes, one of those is my essay in European Friends of the American Revolution, which is published by the University of Virginia Press. I have an essay in that is titled Lafayette and the More Perfect Union, Strengthening America in the Confederation Era, 1783 to 1789. You can find all the details in that. And then next, yes, this is the original volume from our Lafayette Papers project. You may find this in your local library. There are lots of copies of it available online. This is volume 5 of Lafayette in the Age of the American Revolution, which covers the 1784 tour. So if you really want to get into the addresses and the letters and everything, that would be good. Thank you, Paul, for that comment. And we have one more book here, a little smaller book.
Hold on, I'm getting there.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm getting there. This one.
Yes. And this was done by the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, called Lafayette in Transnational Context. It came out in 2015, so you may be able to find it online, maybe even pick up a copy used. The essays are still good there. I have an essay in there on Bridges to Freedom, Lafayette's use of revolutionary rhetoric in the political strategies of his tours, where I talk about primarily, well, actually, all 3 tours and how Lafayette uses the language of the Enlightenment to encourage reform. And so, again, if you're interested in any of those 3 tours, that would be helpful.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question from a Robert Wong. My understanding is that Lafayette is not celebrated in France today. I find this ironic since France is not a monarchy today, but a republic. Can you comment on this?
Well, then you need to look at my essay in the new book on Lafayette that was done with the Fairfield Conference, because I talk about how politicized historians have fought over the message of Lafayette. And we have those on the royalist end of the spectrum, many reactionaries. We have people on the radical end of the spectrum who also didn't like Lafayette because they figured that he didn't go far enough. And what I think you need to recall is that the last 4 years of Lafayette, he was in opposition. He was not in the government in power, and Louis Philippe was pulling every trick that he could to denigrate Lafayette, and he continued in power until 1848. So there's a very long gap between the popularity of Lafayette upon his death and the periods, the years that followed. So Lafayette was not anathema in France in his lifetime, though, let's say, people on the extremes continued to be opposed to his perspective as what today I think we would call a moderate.
Thank you, Robert. Okay. Any other questions? You can use the chat. You can raise your hand. See, I just in the react button at the bottom, you can raise your hand like that, or you can unmute and just ask a question. Anything you got? Anything about Lafayette? Wow, you guys know everything about Lafayette, don't you? It's amazing.
Well,
All
I would
right.
say, Chuck, you and a lot of the members of the American Friends of Lafayette have spent a lot of energy here lately getting the real messages of Lafayette out. Let's see. We have a question from
Yeah, I got
Lafayette.
a question from Lloyd Framer. Where did it go? Here it is. How did Lafayette interact and try to support Native Americans during his tour of 1784? I know this is significant.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you look at our coverage in volume 5 of the Lafayette Papers Project, you'll find out that see, Lafayette had been not what we today would call a blood brother, but had been adopted by some of the pro-American Native Americans. And so he knew about Native American religions, so that he helps the Americans negotiate this Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1784. He actually goes to the conference. They call him by his Native American name. And he speaks to them by saying, "I have a dream that you will sit down with the people from the United States, and you will become good brothers, and you will work together for the betterment of all." And of course, in Native American religion, if you had a dream, it was a vision from the Great Spirit. Now, all of the chiefs who had gathered for this negotiation with the Americans knew exactly what Lafayette's speech was about. So if you look at volume 5 of the Lafayette Papers Project, you can get the full text of Lafayette's speeches to these chiefs.
Okay, I have a question from Roy Wolf. Roy asks, when Lafayette died, was he still happy with the rule of Louis Philippe?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, he fell out with Louis Philippe in 1831 when he realized that Louis Philippe was not supporting the Poles in their revolution. He was not supporting the Italians in their revolt against the Austrians. That a lot of what Louis Philippe had told him was essentially a lie. And so Lafayette enters actively into the opposition. And in fact, there's a point where Louis Philippe is paying people to write diatribes against Lafayette.
All right, all kinds of questions coming through now. Could you speak more about the relationship between Lafayette and the Greene family, both before and after General Greene's death?
Oh, yes, because he had known Greene from the Rhode Island days, and in fact he followed Greene in correspondence after the Revolution, and the Greene family would go visit Lafayette and stay at his house at LaGrange in the countryside. So Lafayette was anxious for the later generations of the Greene children to get to know France and begin to develop a love for it as he had.
That was a good question, Kate. Thank you. Now a question from Almut Spalding. I see Diane. I'll get you, Diane. Almut Spalding is on the call, and she's asking, how do you respond to the view that some French think that Lafayette was a little stupid? There's an American biography that seems to take up this view.
Yes. And again, that really comes out of a post-World War I view of many scholars that anybody who'd be interested in the military must be somewhat ignorant and not really with it. They can't be very bright. And it's kind of stayed with a lot of the people who have written on that era since then. The other thing is Napoleon, when Lafayette ceased to follow his political line, said he's an idiot. Well, I mean, we all know about politicians who can't get along with, when other people can't get along with them, immediately say they're idiots. So that kind of stuck from the Bonapartists.
And by the way, Emma wants to point out that was on her computer, but it was Paul's question. So she wants to distance herself from that question the best she can. I got a question from Rhonda Wilson. Would you have thought that your research on Lafayette, when you began doing it, would carry it through your lifetime?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't realize that the teaching load would be so severe that I wouldn't get as much published as I hoped to. And of course, since I've stopped teaching about 3.5 years ago, I've really been able to accelerate the work on these Lafayette books. I want to do a book on the tour, and then I want to do a popular biography of Lafayette based on scholarship. So I want to make it available for a general audience.
Thank you. Diane, did you want to ask a question?
I do. Robert, hi, Diane Shaw here. Thank you for your talk. I am interested in learning more about the American Philosophical Society induction that happened during the 1784 trip. And I'm wondering if there are many records there at the APS. Did you find, or is that because Ben Franklin hated the subject matter of Lafayette's talk?
I've been records? Yeah. Yes, Lafayette gave a talk on mesmerism, which I think today would be called the force of magnetism, which interested a lot of people in France and across Europe in the late 18th century. And so Lafayette, again, as many people of his time, gets caught up in some of these pseudosciences. But I think because when Lafayette came over on the ship across the Atlantic, he had terrible seasickness, and they told him that if he held on to the main stack, that would help his seasickness, which it just didn't do. And the result was that all of the tar that was on these masts suddenly was transferred to Lafayette's clothes, a terrible mess. But it was that idea, and I don't know that we've entirely solved it. What is the nature of magnetism? But unfortunately, that paper is lost.
It's lost. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. One of our younger members, Aubrey Mitchell, has a good question. I read in a book that Lafayette did not get to meet his first child. Is that true?
Well, no, he did get to meet his first child, but his first child died while Lafayette was in America. So Henriette was the child that died in infancy.
So did he meet Henriette before he left? No, she was pregnant with Henriette when he left for America, correct? In 1777, is that correct?
Yeah.
No, then, that was the second daughter.
That was the second daughter. So when would he have met her?
Yeah, Henriette was 2 when he left.
Right.
Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, everybody. All right, Kerry's asking, Lafayette had met with and had been given an indigenous name by members of the United Tribe in the northern New York State during a campaign of the American Revolution. Some of the United subsequently fought on behalf of the Americans, rebelling against King George III in Britain. I guess what this person's asking is, what was the name given to him?
Kayenleha.
There you go. I can't pronounce
Kayenleha,
it.
which
Good.
actually was the name of a famous warrior in that tribe, with the idea that if Lafayette had that name, that he too would become a valorous warrior.
Okay.
Again, part of their religion.
All right, now T. Cody's asking a question that I love. Now, I think this question's a little off, but I think you'll get the gist of it because I think I know what this person is asking. Were the French and German operas named Leonore really based on Adrian's rescue of her husband using an American passport name, her Mrs. Mortier of Hartford, Connecticut?
Probably not. I think there was a much more famous figure that was imprisoned. There's been an article written on that with a lot of speculation. But I think at the time, there was a much more famous figure, maybe Spanish or something at the time.
I thought there was an opera that was based.
Been a lot of speculation about that.
Yeah, I thought there was an opera that was based on the failed rescue of Lafayette at Olmutz. Does anybody know about it? Does anybody know? Paul Spalding, do you know anything about that? No?
No, I don't know that it is Fidelio. There's been a lot of speculation.
Paul, do you have anything on that?
It was Fidelio. But there were other figures of prominent people imprisoned.
I see Laura saying it's not proven. Okay.
Not proven.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
But it is very fascinating, though. And I will tell you this. Lafayette loved opera, and Lafayette had a box in the Paris Opera where his family would gather. So he loved music.
All right, so I'm going to have our current president ask a question of our president emeritus, Alan Hoffman.
Oh, hi, Robert.
Hi, Alan.
So I have one comment, and that is, and you know this as well as I do, that during the farewell tour, Lafayette actually sought out the descendants of his close friends. He saw Lucy Knox, the daughter of Henry Knox, in Portland, and he also saw, and it's not entirely clear, but I think it was the granddaughter of Nathaniel Greene in the West somewhere. It might have been St. Louis, but I can't confirm that. So that was kind of a pattern. In addition to seeing his living friends from the American Revolution, he saw the next generation as well.
Thank you, Alan. Now listen, guys, it's 8:34. If you guys want to leave, just sign off. But I'm not going to end this yet because I got more questions, and we've got Robert Crout in our clutches right now. So I'm going to continue. But please feel free to leave if you want to, if you dare. Okay.
By the way, on Nathaniel Greene, you know that he was given a plantation by the state of Georgia, which was near Savannah, and on that plantation was Lafayette's handservant from the Revolution, the one that's in the famous painting. And so it's unclear as to whether members of the Greene family came down to Savannah to meet him there for that dedication of the Greene Monument.
All right, somebody's asking, and I can help answer this question. Can you share the details on your visits to Lagrange and explain why it remains off limits to most visitors today?
Well, let me start by saying that it took me about 14 years to get in there myself. And that was after editing the Lafayette Papers project. And it involves some of the politics with the Chambrun family. which are fairly controversial. I would say at this point, there are more visitors going to Lagrange than ever went there before.
Agreed.
And I think the issue is there are so many fragile contents in the castle that they would be afraid that there would be some problems with too many people traipsing through there.
Okay. Next thing is, let's see. What is your opinion on how Lafayette dealt with Washington as a slave owner?
Yeah, that was a real issue for Lafayette, because it's not just simply Lafayette's visit to Mount Vernon. And of course, you know that Lafayette visited the slave quarters at Montpelier when he visited James Madison. But it was that idea of a contradiction between ideals and realities. And so he was really encouraging Washington to do this experiment, just as he had done in South America with Cayenne. And Washington acknowledges the issue, but there are all kinds of questions. You know, the slaves in Lafayette's will were to be free. I mean, in Washington's will were to be freed, but it just didn't happen. And the issue with Jefferson was that there was a lot of wealth tied up, and they could never figure out how to cut themselves from this. Remember, the phrase that Jefferson uses it is holding a wolf by the ears. It's you want to free, but you don't know what the implications of that would be. And in fact, Lafayette was more concerned about racism than he was about slavery. Lafayette's much more verbal about his issue of skin color, because he saw free African Americans being treated horrendously throughout the American states. And in fact, he wondered whether they could find peace in America. He actually, in his later years, proposes that maybe they should go to a multiracial society like the Texas province of Mexico. And remember the enslaved experiment of Fanny Rice. She eventually decided that it wouldn't work, and so she provides transport for them to Haiti. And of course, when they got there, they were considered Americans and not really Haitians. So they were on the outs there. So all these quandaries that they had in the quest for some kind of a solution.
All right, here's my favorite question so far, Robert. What are your gaps of knowledge about Lafayette?
Well, let me put it this way. This last week, as I was working on the material for the tour, the 1784 part of the tour, I found out that an autograph dealer in Pennsylvania had just sold a letter from Lafayette to James Madison that had been written in the summer of 1784 that neither I nor the people at the Madison papers ever knew about.
Wow.
So that had come through a family And so you never know what additional materials may just pop up out of nowhere.
All right. And I think we're going to wrap things up now. It's amazing. We topped out at 80 attendees and we now are still at 75 attendees. So not many people dropping out. You kept people's attention, Robert. Thank you very, very much.
Okay. By the way, somebody was asking about this bust of Washington in Lafayette's bedroom in Paris. There was also a photograph of Ceausescu that Lafayette got in 1831 and that he put over the bust of Washington to show that he was not just interested in the past, he was interested in the future of revolutionary governments for human rights.
Robert mentioned a book earlier in the program, and he mentioned this book, and we are selling this book on our website. It's a wonderful book, and proceeds from this book are going to the American Friends of Lafayette and the enduring struggles for human rights and democratic governments. Go to friendsoflafayette.org and buy your copy today, and President Hoffman will mail it himself. He'll even autograph it for you if you want him to. That ends tonight's wonderful speaker series. I want to thank Robert Crout very much. Good job, Robert.
Thank you.